As I said a few moments ago, we're beginning a new sermon series based upon the Lord's Prayer. And a cantata written by musician and director and writer Pepper Choplin, titled Our Father, A Journey Through the Lord's Prayer. And best of all, each week our choir will be singing a song from this cantata to highlight a particular aspect of the very familiar but not always completely understood prayer that we call the Lord's Prayer. This was the first in that series, and you did a great job. Thank you so much. Now, we call it the Lord's Prayer for a pretty good reason. He gave it to us. It's introduced to us in Matthew 6 as basically a primer of prayer. This is how you should pray. Now, most of us had shared this prayer a bazillion times before we ever read it in Scripture. We know it by heart. And that can be both a good thing and a bad thing, can't it? We can say it in our sleep. And sometimes it seems to me that that's exactly what I do. Sometimes I pray it from memory, but not from heart. And that's something that should never be done with prayer, right? We know this prayer. But what does it mean? Have you ever thought about that? We're going to explore that very thing for the next few weeks. Now, we are, in fact and indeed, a praying church. We know that prayer offers hope. We know that it gives us God's mighty shoulder to lean upon. It connects us with God and with each other when the nights are dark and the storms are raging. It also gives us an anchor to hold on to when trouble and fear and doubt begin to creep into our life and into our faith. So we're introducing this series by basically beginning at the beginning. This morning we're going to talk about doubt, not prayer. And we use the most famous doubter of all time in what just might be the most perfect post-resurrection text ever. And we'll get into all that a bit more in a moment, but first let's take a moment to be in prayer together. Gracious and loving God, we are here in the aftermath of the joy of Easter. And there is a question in our heart. So now what? What do we do now? What do we do with Easter? We know that whatever it is that you have for us to hear this morning, whatever word, whatever message, whatever nudge you have in mind for us, we know that, well, without your help, we're not going to get it. So we pray this morning that you send a spirit of openness to us. Open our hearts and our minds and our ears to the words that we have from you this morning. And I pray that I can find a way to get out of the way so that it's your words to your people that comes through and not mine. Amen. I recently heard a story about a little boy who, growing up in a rural community where his father served as the local United Methodist pastor. And this little boy was outside playing, as little boys are wont to do, and he was doing all the things that little boys do. He was climbing trees, and he was rolling in the dirt and wrestling with his dog. He waded in the neighbor's pond looking for tadpoles. After a full afternoon of being a child, his mom called him in for dinner, and the family gathered around the table. And his mom looked at him and said the word that every young man hates to hear. Let me see your hands. Now, there was some enthusiastic rubbing of his hands on his jeans before he held up his hands for inspection to his mom, hoping that this time he would just get to eat. His mom looked at his hands and asked, "How many times do I have to tell you that you have to wash your hands before you eat? When your hands are dirty, they have germs all over them, and you could get sick." After we say the blessing, I want you to march straight into the bathroom, young man, and wash your hands. I heard that 1,000,000 times growing up. It was busted yet again. So everyone bowed their heads while Dad said the blessing, and then the little boy got up and headed to the bathroom to wash his hands. But before he got there, he stopped and he turned around and he looked at his mother and said, "Jesus and germs. Jesus and germs. That's all I ever hear around here, and I have seen neither of them." Friends, it is hard to believe in what we don't see or hear or taste or touch. Even solid faith sometimes stumbles when doubt creeps in. Yet doubt can be the concrete that true faith is built upon. As I mentioned earlier, our text for this morning has the disciple Thomas as an important character. As you well know, the main character in Scripture is always God. But this time Thomas plays a major role. And Thomas is famous for his doubt. In fact, 2,000 years after the fact, poor Thomas is still referred to as Doubting Thomas. How would you like that nickname to stick to you for 2,000 years and be in a book? Doubting Pat. Doesn't work. Doesn't work. And considering how well Thomas is to us, you might think he's all over the New Testament. But you'd be wrong. In the first 3 Gospels, he's barely mentioned. It's only in John's Gospel that Thomas emerges as a significant character. But even then, depending upon translation, there are only some 155 words that have to do with Thomas. Though there's not a lot written about him, there's more than one character description about him that we can get from Scripture. For instance, when Jesus turned his face towards Jerusalem, the disciples thought it would be certain death for all of them. Surprisingly, it was Thomas who said, "Then let us go so that we may die with him." What a courageous thing to say. Yet do we remember Thomas for his courage? We also fail to point out that the story of Thomas' doubt, that in that same story, there's only one place where the divinity of Christ is bluntly and unequivocally stated in the text that we heard this morning. It's interesting to me that in the story that gives Thomas his nickname, it's the same story that has him making a rock-solid confession of faith. He confesses that Jesus is my Lord and my God. Not teacher, not Messiah even, but God. It's the only place where Jesus is named God without qualification of any kind. It's uttered with a conviction as if Thomas was simply stating a fact, like 2 + 2 = 4, I think. And the sun is in the sky. You are my Lord and my God. These are certainly not the words of a doubter. But history remembers him most for the scene where the resurrected Christ made an appearance to the disciples in a home in Jerusalem. Thomas was not present at that meeting, and when he heard about the event, he refused to believe it. Now, maybe he was the forerunner of the modern-day cynic. And maybe the news simply sounded too good to him to be true. And Thomas said, "Unless I feel the nail prints in his hands, I will not believe." I think it's more likely that he said, "I cannot believe." I think many of us have heard something similar said by skeptics, and maybe we were the skeptics saying it at that time. I have to see for myself before I can believe that. It's hard not to notice that in the turmoil and the danger after Jesus' arrest and crucifixion, that Thomas wasn't with the disciples. And so he missed Jesus' post-resurrection appearance. I think it's likely that the writer of the Gospel of John is suggesting to us that Christ appears most often within the community of believers that we call the church. And when we separate ourselves from the church, we take the chance of missing his unique presence in our lives. But the story doesn't end there. For Thomas, or for us, Jesus comes back. And the second time Jesus made an appearance, Thomas was back with the disciples, and this time he witnessed the event. This time he believed. It seems to me that there are at least three things that we can learn from doubting Thomas this morning. The first is Jesus didn't blame Thomas for doubting. Historically, the church's handling of doubt has been clumsy and shaming. Like only the weak in faith would ever doubt. The church has almost always coupled doubt with a lack of belief, but Jesus did not. Did you catch that as the text was read? Jesus never condemned Thomas. I think that he understood that once Thomas worked through his doubts, he would be one of the surest men in all of Christendom. And that's absolutely the way it worked out. According to Christian tradition, Thomas went on to evangelize in India for some 20 years and was murdered for his faith around the year 72 of the Common Era. Now, frankly, I'm somewhat dubious when people say that they've never had any doubts in their life. And I would hesitantly suggest that places them above Jesus. In the garden, he asked God to take away the cup of poison that he might live. And he asked God why he had abandoned him, why he had forsaken him on that cross. Jesus was fully human. Even Jesus had questions and doubt. And given what he went through, why wouldn't he? Authentic faith is most generally seeded by intellectual honesty. And doubt is the bedrock of honesty. Put it another way, faith is not the absence of doubt. It's the overcoming of doubt. I've had doubts. Given the fluctuation of our investments over the past few weeks, I have doubted the current financial footing America is on. And sometimes, I doubt that spring will get here before August this year. I doubt that Max the Wonder Dog will ever think that he's not the one in charge at our house. But friends, I have stood graveside, or in a home or hospital, listening to the sobs of families whose hearts are breaking at the loss of someone close, and I have thought silently to myself, is this all true? Is resurrection a reality or an attempt to comfort the grieving? Are the scoffers correct? Is it simply ancient myth designed to get us through the long, lonely nights? But then I remember Alfred Lloyd Tennyson's words, there lives more faith in honest doubt than in half the creeds. So sometimes we find ourselves crying out, as did the Father, hoping for a miracle for his child in Mark's Gospel. Lord, I believe, but help my unbelief. Secondly, Thomas offers us an important truth. That some of the most important things in life can never be conclusively proven in a lab. Jesus said, Thomas, you have believed because you've seen. Blessed are those who have not seen yet still believe. Now, I don't know how that makes you feel, but I find it comfortable. Because when I read that text, Jesus is talking to and about me. See, I doubt I'll ever see Jesus face to face in this life. And I'll not have the chance to put my finger in the nail wounds or touch the pierced side. Neither of which I would do anyway. It will never be proven to me beyond any shadow of a doubt that he was raised from the dead. See, there's plenty of shadows in my life. And Jesus understands it's harder for us to believe without seeing than for Thomas who touched the wounds. And yet Jesus counts us blessed. Friends, you cannot conclusively prove the qualities and components of love and friendship and faith. You can't find them in a lab. How can you establish beyond the shadow of a doubt your love for your children? Give me verifiable evidence that love even exists, yet we all know that it does. Cynics dismiss our best efforts to explain faith as merely the self-righteous attempts to make ourselves look good or to manipulate the weak-minded. Friends, if the goal of your faith life is for someone to show you a photograph of God, then friends, I fear you will be forever disappointed. What would it look like to live in a purely rationalistic world? One where miracles and faith and love are removed from our way of thinking. Thomas Jefferson ranks as one of our nation's greatest intellects. And he rejected the notion of miracles. When he approached the scriptures, he could not tolerate those passages. So he edited the Bible. In the Jefferson Bible, you will find only the moral teachings and historical events of Jesus' life. There is no virgin birth, no healing of Jairus' daughter, no walking on water, and there is no resurrection. Here's how the Jefferson Bible ends. There laid they Jesus and rolled a great stone at the mouth of the sepulchre and departed. They buried Jesus and they went home. For Thomas Jefferson, the gospel ends at a tomb that stood forever full and always closed. Yet I am unconvinced that the church can stand for 2,000 years inside the walls of a closed, dark tomb. There is no power in that dark place. Rather, the church is alive because he is alive. So it seems to me that we must leave some room for mystery in our worldview, but that absolutely does not preclude science or reason. It does mean that the most important things in your life will never be proven in a lab. And you'll likely believe them anyway. We call that faith. The post-Easter question is, so now what? What do we do with this whole Easter thing? Where do we go from here? Our third lesson from Thomas answers that question for us, I believe. We really can move beyond doubt to faith. It's human to doubt. But maturing faith will move beyond doubt most of the time. Jesus admonished Thomas, stop doubting and just believe. In the early days of the ministry of John Wesley, Methodism's founder, he was racked with doubts and uncertainties, like every pastor I have ever known in my life and ministry. So he went to his old friend and mentor, Peter Böhler, and confessed his doubts. When I first read Böhler's response to Wesley, I thought it made no sense. But practice has taught the wisdom his words were for Wesley. Preach faith till you have it. And then you'll preach faith because you have it. In other words, act as though you have already moved past doubt into faith, and because you are living it out, you will see what happens and understanding will come. Friends, when we gather in this place, on Sunday morning or Wednesday night or whenever, we come to see and feel the heart of God. There are times in our lives when we face the gamut of human suffering and disaster, and sometimes in the midst of all of that, our faith can stumble. When these moments of deep doubt come, let me offer something that was once shared with me by an older and far wiser pastor. And it's gotten me through some faith trials of my own. Friends, if you don't remember anything else from this sermon this morning, please remember this. Never doubt in the dark what God has told you in the light. Never doubt in the dark what God has told you in the light. He said this because it's in moments of spiritual light or faithful clarity that God shows us truth. Even if He doesn't and we can't explain it or prove these truths, these moments of spiritual light are so very important because they allow us to get through the too many times of doubts that come into the lives of every single one of us. But we only believe these things when we trust the God who offers these moments of light to us. In moments of light, God has told you that He will never desert you. Don't doubt that. Even during the times when we look around and we ask, where is God now? Friends, He's right here. He's right where He's always been, right beside you. In moments of light, God has told you that the resurrection is a reality, and so is eternity. Don't let the darkness cause you to doubt that. Trust that eternity is true. We have an awesome and very long retirement plan. In moments of light, God has told you that even the very hairs on your head are numbered. That means everything about you is known, and He still loves you without condition. Don't ever doubt God's love in the dark, scary, and lonely times of your life. May our questions and our honest doubts lead us into a deeper faith, like that which happened with Jairus and Thomas and Simon Peter and John Wesley and Mother Teresa and the likes of us. Amen.